Good evening. I'm Tom Cadigan, Associate Director of Alumni Relations and a proud member of the class of 2002. And wherever you may be zooming in tonight, I want to welcome you to our alumni webinar event titled Election 2020, The Professional's Perspective. And based on the response, this timely topic is hitting home for many of you, a popular one. Our hope in crafting this two-part election series, in which tonight is part number one, is to model productive political debate across a variety of perspectives and experiences, all rooted in Holy Cross's mission and values. Our participants tonight are excellent examples of that ideal. The Alumni Office is so grateful to the college's J.D. Power Center for Liberal Arts in the World, a terrific collaborator on this election series. The center's director, Professor Daniel Klingard, whom we'll see next week for part number two, was extremely helpful in putting this series together. Now, before I introduce tonight's faculty moderator, I have some brief housekeeping notes. We'll be together for just about an hour. You're welcome to submit questions at any time throughout this discussion using the Q&A function on your toolbar. Now, many of you pre-submitted questions well in advance, and our panelists will jump into those first. If time allows, we'll try to get to some of your new questions in real time, so please keep them coming. Now, some words about our moderator, who will in turn introduce our panelist. We are thrilled to be joined by Alex Hindman, Assistant Professor of Political Science at Holy Cross. Professor Hindman holds a PhD from Claremont Graduate University and specializes in American politics, the U.S. Constitution, and public law. And we are so happy to have him with us this evening. Thank you for joining us for tonight's discussion about election 2020. And now it's my pleasure to turn things over to Professor Alex Hindman. Alex?
Thanks, Tom. Really appreciate it here. I realize I'm the only member of this panel that's not a Holy Cross alum, but I guess I hope to be an honorary one day. So thank you for letting me join you all. Just let me start. I want to introduce our panelists so we can get right down to some of the questions you've raised. Tim Bishop, class of 1972, represented the New York 1st Congressional District for 6 terms from 2003 to 2015. Prior to his time in the U.S. Congress, Tim served as the provost of Southampton College, which is now called Stony Brook Southampton, and it's part of the SUNY system. While in Washington, Congressman Bishop worked on some of the most important legislation of our time, including the Affordable Care Act, the Emergency Economic Stabilization Act, commonly known as TARP, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009, and several other important pieces of legislation. He served on the Committee on Education and the Workforce and on Transportation and Infrastructure, both of those committees. And Tim holds a bachelor's in history from Holy Cross, and he holds a master's in public administration from Long Island University. Our second panelist, Peter Flaherty, another Holy Cross alum, class of 1987, is the co-founder of Esplanade Strategies, a public affairs and political strategy consulting firm, and he's also a co-founder of the Shawmut Group. Throughout his career, Peter has advised several political candidates on political strategy and debate preparation, including several gubernatorial races, several congressional races in both the House and the Senate, as well as a few presidential candidates. Most notably, he served as a senior advisor to Mitt Romney, both in 2008 and 2012. And in 2016, Peter took his talents to Florida to help out with Governor Jeb Bush, and coordinated all of his debate prep for his 2016 run. Peter was an economics major here at Holy Cross, and he also holds a law degree from the New England School of Law in Boston. But most importantly, Tim and Peter teach an excellent and incredibly popular, puts the rest of us to shame here at Holy Cross, an important real-world course on the practice of politics through the J.D. Power Center. And tonight we get a chance to kind of experience what our students get to see on a regular basis. So I know we have a lot of questions, so I want to get kind of right down to it with you guys. I know we're the undercard tonight for the debate, but what's the current state of the race? What would you guys say right now? What's your take sort of your latest views on the race today. What do you guys think?
Let me start with just some numbers, and I think the sum of all of the numbers is that by every available metric, this is a race where Vice President Biden is the clear favorite. That is not to say he's going to win, but we in class have been looking at 3 averages on a weekly basis. One is called the Real Clear Politics average. Right now, that number is 50.7 for Biden, 42.8 for President Trump. We look at the CNN poll of polls right now as of today, 52% for Vice President Biden, 42% for President Trump, and the 538 average, which is 52.1 for Vice President Biden, 42.2 for President Trump. So he has, in summary, Vice President Biden is over 50 in all 3 averages, has a lead of high single digits to even 10 digits. So again, by that metric, by the metric of how the president, how the vice president is doing in the swing states, and also by money available for the last 10 or 11 days of the campaign, one would have to consider Vice President Biden to be the favorite at this point. But I certainly am not counting out President Trump, and I don't think everyone is. Let me just say one more thing, and then I'll defer to Peter. In class, we've been looking at 12 states, the 12 swing states that are going to determine this election, not the popular vote. And Vice President Biden has a lead in 11 of those 12. He trails only in Ohio, and his margin there is he's down by 0.1%. He has tiny margins, lead margins in Georgia of 1%, in Iowa of 0.3%, but he's over 50 in 5 states. That is to say, Vice President Biden is at over 50 in 5 states and at 49 in 3 others. Of most importance, he is over 50 in the 3 so-called must-have states that Biden really needs to carry if he's going to win the presidency, those being Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. And let me just yield to Peter, and then there's a couple more numbers if you wish. But Peter.
Sure.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. I just want to start by reading a headline from Politico that said, Trump begins to ponder losing. 5 states and 3 events scheduled for today. And that Politico headline also linked to an article from the Washington Post from North Carolina. It said, as he took the stage here in this mountain town, Donald Trump was as subdued as the modest crowd that turned out to see him. He complained about the usual things, the dishonest media, his corrupt rival, but his voice was hoarse and his heart didn't seem in it. He also promised to do all that he could to win, but he explained why he might lose. That was written 4 years ago today. Less than 2 weeks later, he was elected president of the United States. So one of the things that we talk about in our class is when we start with the Real Clear Politics and CNN poll of polls, we start like Tim just did with the national polling average, which doesn't look good, but it doesn't matter. Biden could be up by anywhere between 8 and 12 points nationally, give or take. I think we could probably, Tim and I both agree that Joe Biden will probably win the national polls. He will win the national election. If this were a national election, he will win the popular vote, much like Hillary Clinton did, much like Al Gore did. But that's not who gets to go fly on Air Force One. So we talk about that all the time. So we are going to talk about the battleground states. And there are some things that are a little bit different this time, and we can probably try to get into that. But there is a path for Donald Trump, and not just saying because this is going to be just like 2016, because there are what they call shy Trump voters who just don't show up in the polls because it's not necessarily as sad as it is, it's not a very socially acceptable thing to say in certain circles, that you are voting for President Trump. So you'll see the shy Trump voter show up. One of the things that we found interesting, we talked about with our class, was when polled, a lot of people will say who they think is going to win, and Biden is winning both nationally and in battleground states. And then one of the polls has an interesting question. Who do you think your neighbor is going to vote for? And Donald Trump is winning that every single time by anywhere between 5 and 8 points. So that's kind of an interesting question that they didn't ask in 2016, but they ask it now for obvious reasons. So I think there are a lot of things that still could change the trajectory. One of the things that we have talked about is this race has been incredibly stable from the beginning. A lot of things have factored into that, the coronavirus, not least among them. But this election and the race itself has almost been kind of like an earthquake-proof building. And there have been all sorts of things that have been happening around it, but nothing seems to shake it. Nothing seems to move it. It's been very, very stable, and especially from the national polling perspective. So we'll see if there's anything that can change the trajectory of the race. I think tonight's debate is extremely important, much more so for President Trump than it is for Joe Biden. I know we'll probably get into the debate and what people need to get out of the debate tonight. But I think the debate is important. And I think the question of whether or not the Hunter Biden email story is going to have any kind of legs in the mainstream media, I think it's gone, at least even within the last 24 hours, it has gone from a story that social media and big tech didn't want shared for lack of sources to a story that might actually have a little bit more to it than people once thought. So that's kind of where I think things sit.
Let me just make a couple of comments. One of the questions that I know people have asked is, can we trust the polling? And the short answer is we really don't know. But there are some significant differences between the 2016 metrics that we looked at then and what we're looking at 2020. One is that in 2016, Secretary Clinton never got above 50, and either in national polling or in any of the must-win states that she had to have. She had a lead, but she was never over 50. The other element of that is that there were significantly more undecideds. As Peter said, this race has been relatively static, and people have sort of asserted where they stand fairly early on, and they've stayed there. So we have fewer undecideds. And these numbers are striking, in my opinion. And they're important because one of the reasons that President Trump won in 2016 is he was successful in converting a disproportionate number of the undecideds or the late deciders, much, much more so than Secretary Clinton. But just listen to these numbers. In 2016, Wisconsin, at this point in the race, 17% were undecided. Now, 6%. Pennsylvania was 13% undecided. Now 5. North Carolina was 14. Now 5. Michigan was 19. Now 7. Florida was 10, now 6, and Arizona was 17, now 6. So the challenge that President Trump has now is not just to replicate his success in converting the undecideds into his column, but in several of the states that he's got to peel people off of Biden. And that reinforces the point that Peter just made, which is tonight's debate, at least in my view, is the last really substantive chance that the president has to change the contours of the race. So the stakes are higher for President Trump tonight than they are for former Vice President Biden.
Yeah, and one other thing, when we're talking about 2016 versus 2020, Donald Trump's path to victory really was the white working class path in the Rust Belt, in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Let's not forget that Wisconsin, the last time a Republican won Wisconsin was in 1984, before Donald Trump did. In Michigan, the last time a Republican won was in 1988. And in Pennsylvania, the last time a Republican won was also in 1988. So he depended a lot on that white working class path. Now, the problem in the numbers for President Trump, as we analyze it today, white voters in 2016 made up 70% of the electorate, and Trump won white voters overall by 14 points. Right now, his lead is 7 points. Biden has cut into that by a tremendous amount. White with no college degree, another group that Donald Trump's victory rested on. Donald Trump won those voters by 25 points in 2016. He's only beating Joe Biden by 12 points in that same category. Now, the reason why that's important is because the numbers are so huge. And 50% of the electorate in 2016, and the majority of the voters in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin were all white, no college degree. Now, the interesting thing, and I don't know, I'm going to talk to the smart guy, Professor Hindman, why you think this might be. Whites with a college degree, Donald Trump has increased his vote share from 2016, at least if you believe the polling. In 2016, he lost whites with college degree by 11 points. He's only trailing by a point of whites with college degree. Now, the question is, in the aggregate, can he make up the votes that he's losing with the working class and the Rust Belt that he won in 2016 with other groups of voters? Black voters and Hispanic voters. Trump is gaining ground. And in 2016, he lost black voters by 82 points. In 2020, he's gained 11 points. Black voters make up 12% of the national vote. And in 2016, and this is the interesting, black men in 2016, Trump lost by 73 points. And he has gained close to 20 points in that category. And the same with Hispanics. Now, the interesting thing with the Hispanic vote is, once again, we're going to go to the Electoral College. Anybody can talk about these national numbers, and they're absolutely irrelevant. But where it becomes relevant is educated Hispanics. Educated Hispanics are only 2% of the vote nationwide. But there is a huge concentration of them in one state, which is Florida. 24% of Hispanic Floridians have a college degree. And with respect to educated Hispanic voters, Donald Trump lost them by 33 points to Hillary Clinton, and he is trailing Joe Biden by only 7. So he's made up he's made up 26 points on that voter block. So there are some interesting ways that Donald Trump might be able to make up for blocks that he is losing, with really blocks that I think might surprise some people that he's actually gaining a lot of ground in.
No, that's interesting. I mean, I guess it's the electorate is in flux in some way in this case, right? I mean, this kind of leads to one of the questions that one of our attendees raised. What about the Catholic vote in American politics? Are they moving in different ways? I know this is a Holy Cross kind of hot topic in terms of Catholicism in American politics. Is there a Catholic voting bloc that's moving between the parties in that way? I mean, you've mentioned some other demographic categories as well.
Well, the Catholic vote's interesting. Yes, there is a Catholic voting bloc. Yes, okay. It's important. It's important. And it's actually of outsized importance in certain states, like Pennsylvania, for instance. I think it makes up 25% of the Pennsylvania electorate. The Catholic vote is interesting. Since 1972, Catholics have always voted for the winner of the popular vote, except for 2016. So it has kind of fluctuated. It's gone from candidate to candidate, party to party, Catholic to non-Catholic. In 2000, Al Gore won the Catholic vote 50-47. And of course, he won the national popular vote, didn't win the election, but he won the national popular vote. In 2004, John Kerry, a Catholic candidate, lost the Catholic vote to George W. Bush, 52-47. Barack Obama won the Catholic vote twice, 54-45 over McCain and 52-48 over Governor Romney. Donald Trump won the Catholic vote by 7 points, the most that any Republicans won the Catholic vote since Ronald Reagan. So the fact that the Catholic vote is moving, which it is, because there have been some Catholic vote polls that have come out in this particular race, and it's very important. one thing that you would have seen if you paid close attention to the Democratic National Convention, which I thought they did a wonderful job. Both of them had challenges having to do it virtually, and I really thought that the Democratic National Convention was really pulled off. It was done by Hollywood producers, as you might imagine. But Joe Biden and all of his surrogates, they placed a large emphasis on his faith and on his Catholicism specifically. If you look back at some of the speakers, some of the speeches, and if you look at some of his ads, you'll see him kneeling down praying. He talks about holding his son's rosary beads. He has surrogates actually talk about how devout he is. None of that is by accident. So the Catholic vote right now, as it stands in the latest poll for the 2020 race, Biden is actually beating Donald Trump by 12 points in the Catholic vote, 52-40. But in Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Arizona, Florida, and North Carolina, Biden is only, and with the important states, obviously, Biden is only beating Trump by 4 points, which is margin of error. So yes, there is a Catholic vote. Yes, it's important. Right now, it's trending towards Joe Biden.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, this is an interesting question in the context of there's a lot of, some of our attendees had asked questions. One would think that the pro-life concerns and things might push Catholic voters in a direction towards Republicans. And one of our attendees raised the question, some conservatives have called the Democratic Party the party of death. How does one respond to that assertion? I guess either one of you. Yeah.
I'll take a shot at that.
Sure.
As a pro-choice Catholic that is practicing Catholic, I certainly take exception to that characterization. And I would just say a couple of things. One, clearly the issue of choice is one that has great implication, great emotional content, great theological content. And so it is an issue that weighs heavily on people as they go to vote. As I say, I am a pro-choice Catholic. I was elected 6 times in a district where Catholics represent the plurality and also Republicans represent the plurality. One of the things I always did was I always encouraged people not to be single issue voters on any issue. And that the candidate should be assessed in his or her totality, and people should vote for wherever they think the greatest good lies in its totality. I would also say, and I don't want this to sound defensive, but I would also say that there is more to valuing life than protecting life in the womb. The Democratic Party has been the party that has pushed for significant expansion of access to health care over the last 10 years. Right now, the Republican Party is bringing a case to the Supreme Court that would invalidate the ACA, the Affordable Care Act, and have it declared unconstitutional. And the CBO has scored the various, that's Congressional Budget Office, pardon me, the various replacements that have been floated to the ACA as reducing the number of insured people in America by anywhere from 20 to 24 million. The ACA, by the way, reduced the number of uninsured Americans by a little over 20 million in the first few years of its implementation. So there's no question that people who don't have access to quality health care are going to have higher mortality rates than people who do have access to quality health care. Those lives matter. The other thing that I would say, and again, this falls under the heading of not being a single issue voter. I will guarantee that devout Catholics who value the issue of choice, that voted for Donald Trump, were never contemplating that an official policy of his administration would be to take children away from their parents, put them in cages. And there was a report just this week that some 545 kids will most likely never be reunited with their parents. Certainly no person of faith can support that. And so I'm not suggesting that one follows the other. What I am suggesting is that people ought to view the candidate and his or her positions, values, judgments, etc., in their totality, as opposed to focusing on one only issue.
Yeah, this is where Alex, this is where Tim and I and anyone who's been in our classroom always, we come at many policy issues, if not most policy issues, from a different perspective. But we always part company politely when we do and agree to disagree on certain things. I think it's equally important to value life in the womb and life after, right until natural death. And I do think that with respect to the abortion issue, it's interesting. I think that the abortion issue and the pro-life movement got Donald Trump elected in 2016. I think the fact that he came out with his Supreme Court list in 2016 was a very smart political move. I think the fact that in the last debate, he actually brought up the issue of partial birth abortion and late-term abortion and talked about how gruesome it was and called out Hillary Clinton for her position. I can tell you that other Republican candidates don't necessarily proactively take on the issue like Donald Trump did. And I think it helped him. Believe it or not, the most Googled political topic on election day in 2016 was abortion. And I can guarantee you that it probably won't be the most Googled topic, might be the second most after coronavirus. But I think...
I thought you were going to say Hunter Biden's emails.
We'll get to Hunter Biden's emails later. That's for the second half hour. But it's when you talk about practicing Catholics, abortion for practicing Catholics, 71% of practicing Catholics who attend Mass weekly, these are voters, likely voters, consider abortion to be morally wrong. 59% of Catholics in general, not even weekly Mass goers, 59 to 41 say abortion is morally wrong. It's interesting the way this issue has evolved over the years. When you look at the waves of Irish immigrants who came to America and really flocked to the Democratic Party for their respect for the sanctity of life and embracing of and their concern for the poor and their embracing of the immigrants and how that has changed. Cardinal Dolan from New York talks about it a lot, and he talks about the fact that that his own grandmother used to warn him, those Catholics, I have to tell you, those Republicans, we Catholics can never trust Republicans. And Cardinal Dolan just talks about how those times have changed. So I think it's a real issue. I wouldn't be surprised if Donald Trump actually brings it up in tonight's debate, because Joe Biden has changed his position on it, like he has with a lot of other positions.
Sure. It is a real issue, and I mean, again, when I was in office, I had multiple very intense conversations with the bishop of our diocese, and where we left those conversations, they were very respectful and very professional, but where we left those conversations, he asked me to speak about abortion as a tragedy that comes into a young woman's life or a woman's life, which I already was doing. And he also asked me to use the Clinton formulation, which is that if we have abortion, it should be safe, legal, and rare, which again was something that I was my position as well. So it's an incredibly challenging issue. Again, I will just say that I think candidates ought to be assessed in terms of the totality of what their service is likely to include, as opposed to making a yes or no judgment on one only issue.
Yeah. So touch on a little bit relates to this. I mean, I know we've talked a lot about the culture wars a little bit. There's some Catholic American politics, Catholicism and American politics intersect. Much of it is focused recently on the Catholicism of Judge Amy Coney Barrett in terms of her nomination. And so I just want to invite you guys to kind of share some thoughts about court packing, perhaps about how Judge Barrett's presumed confirmation might affect the race for president or for the Senate or anything. Well, I'll let you guys kind of take it where you will.
Peter, you want to start?
You can go.
All right, a couple things. One, I don't think it will have a significant impact on the race in that she's going to be confirmed on Monday. So I think it may have helped somebody like Lindsey Graham in his Senate race. I mean, he's prominent, delivering for conservatives in terms of shepherding Judge Barrett through the confirmation process, but I don't think it's going to have a significant impact on the race. And certainly the polling has not moved really at all since the death of Justice Ginsburg and the nomination of Judge Barrett. So that's one. The second, my own view, I think that if Joe Biden is elected president, he will be the recipient of an enormous amount of pressure from the Democratic left to retaliate. And the retaliation he will be pressured to undertake will take three forms. One would be to pack the Supreme Court. The second would be to have Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico declared states, which would pretty much automatically give you 4 more Democratic senators. And then the third is to abolish the filibuster so that a simple majority, 51, can get you legislation passed in the Senate. My guess is that if a President Biden, if there is ever such a thing, will resist all three. That's my guess. But it is just a hunch based on how he has conducted himself throughout his career. And also, he really is an institutionalist, particularly as it comes to the Senate. So, who knows what the future holds, but that's my perspective.
Yeah, I tend to agree with Tim that I think if Biden were elected, I don't think that he would actually try to push court packing. I do, however, think that if I were advising Biden, I almost think that he should just say that he won't do it. Because at this point, he has his base. They've probably already voted. Not just has his base. He has his base already with their votes banked for him. But the small sliver of undecided voters that are out there right now, number one, it's a character thing. He's not answering a question. And the way that he actually responded to one reporter, I thought was interesting when the reporter said, don't the voters deserve to know? And he said, no, that they don't deserve to know. And then he put it off a little bit more with Stephanopoulos, saying, I think they do deserve an answer, and I'll give it to you before the election. Now, from a strategy standpoint, that actually might be smart because of the coronavirus and the early voting. And I'll tell you why. I think he's trying to run the clock out, and I think he's playing the percentages. These early voters, whether in person or mail-in, are skewing almost 2 to 1, even more so Democrat. So he's thinking right now, as these people are voting, the majority of whom will probably vote for me or leaning towards voting for me, I'm just going to keep it open rather than shut that avenue down. And the more he can get it closer to election day and have all of these, there's 47 million people who voted already, and there's going to be millions more over the next however many days. So the more he can push that answer, the better. Now, the dilemma he finds himself in is that the American people don't like court packing. Of all likely voters, 58% to 31%, 58 are opposed to court packing. Now, why he's playing it cute is because Democrats, 57 are in support of court packing, 57 to 28. So he's trying to have it both ways. The problem with trying to have it both ways is it's kind of like when you're arguing before a jury. I think of the electorate as like a large jury pool. Jurors understand human nature. They know when you're trying to have it both ways. They know when you're trying to be too cute. And he clearly is. It goes to the way that the Democrats have conducted themselves during this hearing as well, I think really does a disservice. I don't think Tim Bishop would have walked out or not voted, no matter who told him to. I just think it really does a disservice really to anybody in the country who's watching it. It really perpetuates the stereotype that there's gridlock and partisanship and do-nothing people in Washington. It really supports Donald Trump's argument that it's nothing but a swamp and it needs to be changed. You look back at the days with Ruth Bader Ginsburg, she was confirmed 96-3, and she wasn't anywhere in the middle. Justice Scalia He's on the opposite side. I have a photo of him right behind me there with my dad. Justice Scalia, 98-0, he was confirmed. I mean, those were the days when you could have a Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Justice Scalia get voted on. And for the most part, these people are voting on their qualifications, their credentials, their jurisprudential scholarship, and their temperament. If anyone watched these Amy Coney Barrett hearings thinking that they were going to see some kind of monster, if you could just turn it on for 5 minutes and even see an opposing senator questioning her and the way that she comported herself. It's interesting. There was a poll that came out the day that Amy Coney Barrett was appointed during the Rose Garden ceremony. She had 35% support for her confirmation. That's gone up 14 points. 51% of Americans now support her confirmation, much more than Kavanaugh and Gorsuch. And 44% of independents support her confirmation. So I think Joe Biden has to be pretty careful the way he handles the court packing and the Amy Coney Barrett question.
Yeah, I don't disagree that what happened today, I don't disagree with Peter's assessment of what happened today. I did think that the way in which the Democrats conducted themselves in the hearings themselves, particularly in contrast to the Kavanaugh hearings, was politically smart. I thought keeping the focus on the Affordable Care Act, because that is a case that will come before the court on the 10th of November, and Judge Barrett will obviously be a very important vote on that. I mean, the Democrats won 41 seats in the House in 2018, focusing on the preserving the Affordable Care Act and preserving access to health care, and pointing out the potential implications of a Judge Barrett vote as a member of the Supreme Court in terms of its implications for health care, I thought was very smart, and we'll see whether it plays and whether it has the same impact that health care had in the 2018 midterms.
Yeah, I thought that was smart as well, and they all went right to the Affordable Care Act. It certainly was choreographed, but I think politically, objectively, I think it was smart that they went right to the Affordable Care Act. They didn't harp really much about as much about her faith as I think everyone thought that they would. Dianne Feinstein did not talk about the dogma lives loudly within you, and that's bothersome, which she did during her confirmation for her first justice appointment. And you know, I will say that when they kept holding up those posters of all of these people who would be affected by the Affordable Care Act, and that when you saw a cutaway, it looked like a courtroom in a murder case with all of the victims' posters blown up around the hearing room. But I do think Judge Barrett handled it very well, and the Democrats had their say. They made their peace, and I found it interesting. And Tim and I haven't talked about this in class, but it was interesting when you saw Dianne Feinstein and Lindsey Graham actually hug each other after it was over. And she said it was one of the best hearings, and one of the best hearings that she had ever seen conducted, especially for a Supreme Court justice confirmation in the Senate Judiciary Committee. And then, once again, underscoring how partisan things can get, there were places like NARAL that were calling for Dianne Feinstein to step down because of the fact that she was extending any kind of grace or courtesy to the Republican chair.
Yeah, yeah. In what sense, I mean, I know that pressure that's coming on Dianne Feinstein coming from the left wing of her party, and there's a similar pressure on Republicans from the far right fringes of their party. I mean, we look at partisan polarization. We've become more divided than we've ever been. What do you make of the pressure? So I guess the pressure on Feinstein is indicative of the pressure that Joe Biden might face. What do you guys make of Joe Biden's ability to sort of stare down the left or the far left and actually maybe reunify the country, as Democrats have claimed they would want to do? Is that possible given what we see happening kind of on the fringes of either party in recent years?
I don't think staring down the far left is going to be Joe Biden's biggest challenge. I think Joe Biden's biggest challenge is going to be getting 60 votes for progressive legislation in the Senate. And I think the left will state its case. but I also think the left will be pretty unanimous in their belief that a Biden presidency is vastly superior to a Trump presidency. In terms of whether Biden can get legislation through the Senate, there's no question he'll get it through the House. Whether he can get it through the Senate is going to be a test of his ability to use the skills that he acquired in 36 years, I think it was, as a senator. When he was the vice president, we sort of jokingly referred to him as the McConnell whisperer, because he was somebody who could get Mitch McConnell in a room and they could talk to one another and they could leave that room with something that they each could live with. Didn't mean they each loved it, but they could each live with it. And they both thought that moving forward with what they had agreed to was better than gridlock. So I think that that again, that's going to be Biden's biggest challenge. I also think that we do need to turn down the temperature. And whether you like President Trump or don't like President Trump, no reasonable person can think that he's done anything to turn down the temperature. And I think that Biden's, personality, the way he deals with things, is one that will be more conducive to collegiality than is currently the case. We're more polarized than we ever were. It used to be that if the Republican Party was in charge versus the Democratic Party being in charge, it was like moving the ball from one 40-yard line to the other 40-yard line. It's now moving the ball from one 1-yard line to the other 1-yard line because we are so different. The issues are so starkly defined and so passionately debated, and we need to somehow get back to the 40-yard line. And I think Biden's the guy to do it.
Yeah, I think I don't think that that Joe Biden is going to have a tough time staring down the liberal wing either. I happen to agree with Tim. If he were elected, and once again I preface everything with a big if when it comes to Joe Biden getting elected, but he has contorted himself over his last several presidential runs to the extent that they really can't ask much more from him than they've already gotten from him. I mean, he used to be against court packing. He now talks about it openly as if it's on the table. At least right now, he is. He used to be against same-sex marriage. He used to be in favor of a partial birth abortion ban. He used to be against taxpayer funded abortion. He used to be in favor of the Hyde Amendment, which would ban any kind of taxpayer funding for abortion. He authored the crime bill. So the Joe Biden, if he were to go to Pennsylvania Avenue, would be a lot different Joe Biden than the first few iterations of Joe Biden. So I think he could kind of look at the left with enough credibility and basically say, what more do you want from me at this point?
I want to ask you guys a little bit about sort of the legislature a little bit. We lose sight sometimes in presidential elections of the Senate. And the Senate, what do you guys make of the state of the Senate this term, this cycle, this electoral cycle? And do you think it's going to change hands?
I'll take a shot at that.
Sure.
I think the most likely outcome is going to be a 50-50 Senate, and the majority is going to be determined by who the vice president is. I think that it looks pretty safe that Mark Kelly will win in Arizona. It looks like John Hickenlooper will win in Colorado, and I think Susan Collins is going to lose in Maine. And I also think, despite the scandal, I think Cal Cunningham's going to win in North Carolina, and I think Tommy Tuberville is going to win in in Alabama. So that'll be a net pickup of 3 Dems, which puts them at 50, and a net loss of 3. So the R's would be at 50 as well. So that's my guess. Now, I also have a sleeper race. Peter and I've teased about this. My sleeper race is Steve Bullock in Montana. I would not be surprised if Steve Bullock, the sitting governor of Montana, knocks off Steve Daines, the incumbent senator in Montana. That would be a game changer if that were to happen. And that's, as I said, that's my sleeper race.
Yeah, I think I'm a little bit more worried about the Senate right now than just because I think in the presidential race, really anything can happen because we did see it in 2016. And in light of the coronavirus and what's happening with voting right now, I really think it's anybody's guess as far as what these polls, how these polls are actually going to be looked upon a day, a week, a month after the election, whenever we get the results. But the Senate, on the other hand, like Tim said, I think it's pretty clear that Cory Gardner is probably in rough shape. I think Martha McSally's numbers, I think if President Trump makes a good last push in Arizona, which he's clearly making the effort to, he could have some coattails in Arizona. I think Martha McSally is going to have to depend on that. And I disagree with Tim. I think Tillis is going to hold on. I think Cal Cunningham's scandal shouldn't go over well anywhere, but I don't think it's going to go over well in North Carolina. I think ultimately Tillis holds on to that. I think Joni Ernst holds on to her seat in Iowa. But I think it's a little bit more of a frightening prospect for the country if Chuck Schumer runs the Senate than if Joe Biden's in the White House, if in fact you had to choose between one or the other. So I think the Senate races is something that people really should be paying attention to.
That's interesting. So
let me put, I'm sorry, Alex, let me put one more thing out there. I had a long talk with a highly regarded Republican pollster the other day, and he suggested that everyone ought to watch Indiana 5, which is an open seat race. It's the seat being vacated by Susan Brooks, Republican, who is retiring. He suggested that if Indiana 5 either is lost by the R or narrowly won by the R, we could be looking at another Democratic wave election similar to what we had in 2018. Right now, most prognosticators are suggesting that the House, the Dems in the House, will pick up somewhere between 5 and 15 seats. What this pollster was telling me is that if the R wins narrowly, then the margin is going to be closer to the 5. If the R loses, then he is suggesting that that's going to be a very, very long night for Republicans, presidency, House, and Senate. We'll just have to see. But one of the things that's good about Indiana 5 is Indiana polls close at 7 p.m. East Coast time on Election Day. So we'll know very early what's happening in Indiana 5.
Interesting. It's interesting. There's always those particular districts that you want to watch to see, sort of to predict. And that's interesting that Indiana 5 is where we're looking this cycle. I guess one of the questions that came in just asked, what's your sense of the Democratic leadership and their stability in the House if Trump wins? And do you see some shakeups in the leadership of either chamber in terms of a Trump victory or a Biden victory?
I'll take the House part.
Sure.
I think Nancy Pelosi is the unquestioned leader of the Democratic caucus in the House. And so unless she chooses to vacate the speakership, she will be the speaker. I think if Steny Hoyer wishes to present himself as a candidate for majority leader, which he does, he will be the majority leader. And I think Jim Clyburn will be the majority whip. So I see no change whatsoever in terms of the top tier of leadership in the House among the Democratic caucus. A source, by the way, of some consternation to Democrats in the House who aspire to leadership. That leadership team has been in place since 2002 or 2003. So there's a lot of sort of pent-up ambition among somewhat less senior Dems, but Dems who would like to take on a larger leadership role. So I think the House is unchanged for this session of Congress coming up. What happens beyond that is anybody's guess, because Speaker Pelosi said back in January of 2020 or December of 2019 that she, or 2018, I'm sorry, December of 18, January of 19, that she would only be speaker for 2 more terms. So she's finishing 1 term, and then next term would be her second and presumably last term.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I tend to agree with Tim. Tim's obviously the expert on the House. He was there. He was there under Speaker Boehner. He was there under Speaker Pelosi. He knows
Speaker Hastert.
And Speaker Denny Hastert. He knows that body more than anybody. So I'm going to agree with everything he said. I will say that the first part of this is going to sound interesting and funny. I really hope that Speaker Pelosi stays the Speaker of the House, and she would be if the alternative is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
So yeah, this is good. This is good, guys. What would you think in terms of the? I want to shift just slightly. Are we going to know on November 3rd the outcome of the presidential election? How many races in the legislature, both chambers, are going to still be up, or will we have a pretty good idea fairly quickly? I know that mail-in voting has been kind of a source of people's confusion this cycle. Are we going to have an idea of who's the victor?
Peter?
I don't think so. I don't think election night we're going to have an idea. In fact, we might get a false sense of security if you're on the Republican side. They talk about the red wave. President Trump talks about the red wave, and people have referred to it as the red mirage because the votes that can be counted more quickly and most quickly are the in-person voting, which presumably conventional wisdom says that that's going to be more Republican than Democrat. So considering that Trump is going to win most of the Republican votes and get some Democrat votes, I think there might be some states that would surprise some people in the Biden war room saying, wait a minute, what's going on here? But I think it'll just be a matter of votes that haven't been counted. And let's not forget there was a little thing in the Michigan race where the Supreme Court has allowed for ballots to be counted if they come in after Election Day, as long as they're postmarked by Election Day. There's another interesting thing. I think it's in Michigan they refer to as naked ballots because they have to be in 2 separate envelopes, one security envelope and another envelope. And if they're not mailed in the right way, the naked ballot of 2020 could be the hanging Chad of 2020. So we might have a problem with that. There are all sorts of and there are some states that have curing provisions where you could go back and try to actually ask someone if that's the way they voted. I think Tim and I had the dean of really Iowa politics, David Yepsen, come in and speak to our class last year and talk about what he thinks about the Iowa caucuses. And he said, the Iowa caucuses are going to be a complete disaster. It's going to be a complete circus. No one's going to know who won, and no one's going to know how to declare a winner. And he was 100% right. I think the same thing is going to happen on election night. I might be wrong, but I think that there's going to be mayhem in certain states. There's going to be allegations of tampering. There's going to be lawsuits, unless, of course, there is a huge victory by, let's say, Joe Biden in Florida. Because Florida is going to be a state where there's going to be, I think you'll probably have a pretty good idea, as opposed to some of the Rust Belt states. And if Joe Biden has an enormous lead in Florida, Donald Trump cannot afford to lose Florida, no matter what the rest of the things shake out. So if Biden's winning huge in Florida, I think the night might be over, even if they don't want to declare it. What do you think, Tim?
I tend to agree. I think it was Pennsylvania that was the Supreme Court case that.
Yeah, Pennsylvania.
And I think increasingly Pennsylvania is going to be the tipping point state. And so the ruling was that if a ballot is postmarked by Election Day and it arrives within 3 days of Election Day, then that ballot will be counted. So it's entirely possible that we will not know the results in Pennsylvania until, Saturday or so after Election Day. And it's entirely possible, therefore, that we will not know who won the presidential if, in fact, Pennsylvania is the tipping point. And in terms of the math and the Electoral College tallies, it could easily be the tipping point. By the way, that policy is not unusual. New York has a policy that if a ballot is postmarked by election day, it has to arrive at Board of Election headquarters within 7 days after. And that's been the policy for years and years. I had one race that was determined by the absentee ballots, and they didn't even look at them until, I think, 10 days after Election Day, which, by the way, is not the easiest thing to sit through. But I think we're in for I think Election Day is going to be an election week. I think we're going to be in for a long period of time before we really know, unless, as Peter said, unless there is a clear winner in Florida, that is Joe Biden. If Joe Biden wins Florida, then it's pretty much game over for President Trump.
Interesting. Tonight, you guys mentioned earlier, I mean, I know there's the debate tonight, and Peter, you've prepared a lot of candidates for debates. What would you say might be a recommendation? And Tim, feel free to weigh in on it too. I mean, what would your recommendations, guys, be to both candidates tonight? What do they need to do? Where do we go from here on this?
Well, I think President Trump needs to tone it down. What I would tell President Trump is to let Joe Biden speak for his 2 minutes. He's going to be muted anyways. There's 2 minutes of uninterrupted time at the beginning of each question for each candidate. What I would say to President Trump in a language that I think he can understand, I would say these are 12 uninterrupted minutes you have in front of 70 million people. It's the equivalent of a Super Bowl ad. Super Bowl ad that he paid for cost $10 million. So I'd say you have the equivalent of $120 million of uninterrupted speaking time. Use it wisely. Think of who your audience is. You've lost women. You've lost suburban women. They're worried about the coronavirus. You've lost seniors. They're worried about the coronavirus. Don't avoid the coronavirus and don't mock the coronavirus. Talk about, be proud of what you did for the coronavirus, own it, and then talk about great hope on the horizon for the coronavirus and the pandemic, and get these kids out of their kitchens and into the classrooms, and let the moms and dads be able to do what they're supposed to do. Talk about it that way. I would talk about the coronavirus. Then I would pivot to the economy, what a great economy he built pre-coronavirus and how it's coming back again. Don't change horses. It's kind of like what Barack Obama did to Governor Romney in 2012 when he said, you know, this is going to take a little time. We're on our way. Let's not change horses now. We're in a great direction. Trump could do the same thing, say, we're going to get the economy back to where we were, which is the greatest economy in the history of the world, however he likes to talk about it. But that's how I would advise him.
I agree completely in terms of how President Trump should try to conduct himself this evening. I think one of the things we're going to learn is whether he's coachable or not, because I'll guarantee you that what Peter just said is what at least the majority of his advisors are suggesting he do. Whether or not he can carry through, my own view is doubtful, but we'll find that out over the next 2.5 hours. I think what Vice President Biden has to do is, I think he has to follow the old Hippocratic Oath deal, do no harm. He's clearly ahead. You know, Trump has presented him as a sort of a drooling, doddering fool who can barely string together a coherent sentence. So he set the bar very low. Biden clearly has to clear that bar, which he will. But I think he has to, you know, be conscious of not making mistakes. I think he has to be conscious of not losing his temper, while at the same time not appearing to be a pushover. So he's got to walk the line in terms of remaining professional without appearing that somebody can walk all over him, which clearly I think is what President Trump is going to try to do. You know, President Trump equates the behavior that he presented in the last debate as evidence of strength. That's his perception of how a strong person acts, and I think Biden has to be able to handle that without you know, responding in kind.
Yeah, and Alex, I would just say, especially since Tim just trotted out the Hippocratic Oath, I would give advice to each of the candidates like this based on who I think are two of the greatest speechwriters of all time. Jack Kennedy's speechwriter, Ted Sorensen, said, and I would say this to Donald Trump, the four most important pieces for delivery, and I would say for your not for a speech, but for your debate tonight: charity, clarity, levity, and brevity. Those are the four most important things that I would say to Donald Trump. My other favorite speechwriter of all time is Demosthenes. Demosthenes said that the greatest quality of a speech, there are three things that you need in a speech: delivery, delivery, delivery. And he actually had a stuttering problem like Joe Biden did. So my advice to Biden would be delivery, 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 charity, clarity, levity, and brevity for Trump.
That's neat. That's neat. Gentlemen, I want to wrap up on this one point. And I know you guys have spent a lot of time with our students. How many semesters have you guys been with our students now? I think it's been like 3 or 4, right?
This is the fourth semester.
So what's different this cycle? We'll end on this question. Somebody brought it up in the chat. What is it like teaching Holy Cross students this time? Is it different than when you were at Holy Cross a couple years ago? What is it like in terms of the 2020 election? How's it been a teaching tool for you guys? What do you guys? What's your sense of where Holy Cross is right now?
Well, first off, let me just say, teaching Holy Cross students is a joy. I mean, it's an absolute joy. And this is our 4th class. The students in each of the 4 classes have been superior. And they have been a joy to teach. They've been a joy to get to know. And they challenge us. I mean, they are perceptive. They're analytical. They are fact-driven and fair-minded, civil, collegial. So I don't know that I have enough superlatives to describe them. Now, if you ask me to contrast how Holy Cross students are now with how they were from 1968 to 1972, you know, I'm just going to leave that alone.
Okay.
I would just echo what Tim said. I mean, our students, I mean, that's just a great way to describe them. They really are a joy to interact with, a joy to teach, and a joy to learn from. You know, I have a son and a niece and 2 nieces who go to Holy Cross now too, and they are my favorite Holy Cross students, but they're tied with the Holy Cross students that we teach. They're intellectually curious. Like I said, they talk about all of these issues and even the polarizing issues in a very informed way. They make it their business to be informed and engaged. And we always have civil debate and civil discourse in our class. And there's enormous respect between and among the different students. That's a real tribute to I mean, it's no surprise to see a Holy Cross student the way that Tim and I see Holy Cross students. And it's a real tribute to all of you who have been teaching them for a long time, and quite frankly, to their parents.
Well, gentlemen, thank you.
On the subject of parents,
sure.
I know Frank Flaherty is listening in, and let me just say, Mr. Flaherty, you have a lot of reasons to be very proud of your son. He has been a joy for me to get to know, and I have learned a ton in teaching with him these last several semesters.
This is perfect. This is perfect. Yeah, the parents are what make Holy Cross great, and it's great to be a part of such a large alumni. I'm adopted. Tom was saying I'm adopted now. I need to get a purple jacket. And it's so great to be part of you guys and get a chance to talk with you both. Thanks for sharing your insights with all of us. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight. This will conclude our talk. But thanks, guys, again. We really appreciate it. There would be a round of applause if we were in person, but thank you all very much.
Our pleasure.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Guys.
Thanks, Tim.